traps, many traps. We're going to talk about traps today. Lots and lots and lots of traps, because I really should have done this video a long time ago, but it's come up as a question, and so therefore I have prepared some material today to talk about traps. Okay, so sound check is good. Bear with me. If you're not familiar with my live streams, look, I will respond to everybody near the end of the live chat. So I'm going to do my presentation first. You can type in your comments, your feedback, your questions, anything you want to add, anything I've missed. You can put that in the chat box and I will respond near the end. Otherwise, if you're re-watching this video for the very first time and not part of the live chat, then all you need to do is just look down in the description to get past all of this, and you will see the start time for the video rather than watching all of my preamble as I get prepared and ready and check that my systems are working correctly. Okay, so we are going to get started, and I'm going to pretty much, normally I'll do a very quick video, and this is probably not going to be that quick. I'm going to talk in detail about quite a few things, and there's a good reason for that, and I will explain as we go. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and in particular I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons and how traps are either save or suck. Or is it suck or save? I mean, who knows? So what does that really mean for Dungeon Masters? Because it's really the Dungeon Masters who have to implement this, but it's also the players who have to contend with those traps as well. So this video is spurred on basically by a subscriber who gave me a comment and asked me a question that he would like me to answer. And I tried my very best to sort of explain it, and he really wanted me to say, how do I handle traps? And then asked me, how do I handle traps? And that's not really a great thing to be asking, primarily because just because I handle traps a particular way doesn't mean you should handle traps that way either. But we are going to talk about the topic and cover how I deal with traps. So very quickly, I'm going to say right now, I don't use a lot of traps in my game, but I do use them. But they don't look like traps that you're probably very familiar with, because I use them in a manner in which I think they should be used based off how I've seen traps used in real life. And that means I don't do a lot of them, and they are usually very hard to find. They're very hard to deactivate, they're very hard to understand, and they are pretty lethal. As a general rule, they're quite nasty, which is probably a good reason not to have them in your game a lot, particularly if you're going to make them as dangerous as my traps are. So here's the problem with the save or suck. So what is that really referring to? The save or suck is referring to the origins of Dungeons and Dragons. And the origins of Dungeons and Dragons is problematic in many different ways, because one, it was trialing a new way of looking at things, but it was also trying to make traps seem like they made sense. And so that's why Gary Gygax and the early creators of Dungeons and Dragons used the trap application in the game. It was utterly brutal. You know, you rolled a dot. So basically, if you didn't notice the trap and you didn't deactivate the trap because you didn't notice it, and then you actually got caught in the trap, it was usually one dice roll, some sort of save or check, and if you failed that, the trap killed you outright, which is why it's called the save or suck. You either save and you're all right, or you fail and you wind up with one dead character and have to bring in a new character. Or hopefully you have the ability to raise your character from the dead, or some sort of something like that. So I can totally understand why a lot of people over time, after playing Dungeons and Dragons for a while, would get quite upset with that. Not everybody did. You know, the early players, some of them were perfectly fine and accepted that as a way of playing the game. But not everybody did, and the more time it passed, traps developed a reputation for being just, they weren't fun, they weren't fair, and they were just horrible, and basically people wanted them removed. So I totally understand that concept. So when I talk about building traps that are deadly in my own game, I'm not actually talking about that application where you roll a single dice roll and then you're either alive and you avoided the trap, or you're dead. I'm not talking about that. We'll get back to that though. Now, here's the problem I found with traps. If a trap was noticed, then you need to then find out or figure out how to disarm it. Then you have to disarm it correctly, and this is going to require some dice rolls, which usually your dungeon master will request. Okay, and this is what used to happen in my games. Is we would have what was called the door macro or micro, however you want to talk. Basically, it was a set of instructions we gave our dungeon master when we were exploring, and it usually encompassed if there was a lock, if there was a door, if there was a treasure chest, anything that needed to be opened. If we were about to step into a new room or passageway, we would apply the trap search macro, and it looked like this. We make a perception check. We cast detect magic to make sure we covered all our bases, because not all traps can be detected with a perception check by sight, sound, or anything like that, right? So we're going to make sure we cover all our bases. So it was perception, detect magic, and nowadays we use investigation to understand how things work. So it would be investigation followed by that. And of course, if you did find that there was a magical aura there, and you think, well, that might be a trap, then you wanted to focus on it and get the school of magic. It was too dangerous to be going and touching something and casting identify. So your options were, well, okay, if we think it's a trap, we'll just cast dispel magic and get rid of whatever's there, and hopefully that'll solve our problem. But it doesn't necessarily tell you whether there's a magical trap or not there. So these are the things we used to do. And then of course, once you've done all that, it's right, okay, we've disabled the magical trap with our dispel magic, or an anti-magic field. And then if it was a mechanical trap, then there was some sort of way of disarming it. And nowadays we use thieves' tools, which makes perfect sense. I use sleight of hand, or you make a dexterity check of some kind, and you use your proficiency if you are proficient with them. All of those things are all very fine, but it's boring, and it's time consuming. It's also slows the game down to a crawl. It makes delving into dungeons particularly unfun for the dungeon master and the players. So here's one of the quagmires for any dungeon master. Okay, we've got the old way of running a trap, which is save or suck. You roll a dice, you either fail and die, or succeed and avoid it, or you wind up with your players doing this sort of thing to compensate for that. That's why people used to use the 10-foot pole and various other things to try to figure out whether there were traps around. Life was cheap, life was really cheap. You had to have a few characters ready to play. Now, what has happened recently in the last, I would say, 10 years, is that modern trap design from Wizards of the Coast and their design team has taken on board the concept of the trap and changed it fundamentally. And what they've done is they've decided that it's not really a good selling point to have something in the game that people don't like. And traps are one of those things in Dungeons and Dragons that many people don't like. They were also probably more concerned with the fact that it might drive the players away from the hobby rather than, or they might leave the hobby because their dungeon master was using traps in the game, or their adventures had traps that were so nasty. So they made some adjustments. They made traps very easy to deal with. And the sorts of things they used to do and they still do, and it still carries on into Dungeons and Dragons 5e, is one, they made traps in such a way as they were not particularly difficult to find. You could find a trap pretty easily. You know, you really only needed a 50-50 chance on a 20-sided dice to find the trap. And on top of that, even if you found it nowadays, your investigation check to figure out how the trap works is probably not going to be very high. Maybe a 10, or 11, 12. It's not going to be a high number whatsoever. It doesn't matter, okay? And then you're disabling it. Your disabling might be slightly higher than the perception check or the investigation check, all of which you still need to get right, but the chances are, you know, it's still not going to be very hard. Maybe it's a 13 or a 12. It's not that difficult, provided somebody's proficient with thieves' tools and it's a mechanical trap. Otherwise, they need to use some sort of magical means, right? So detect magic. We're going back to the good old days, right? We're talking back to that door macro, that trap macro I was talking about. But even if all of that doesn't work, even if they get through those 3 rolls and they don't manage to sort of deal with the trap successfully and disarm it, and they do activate it, and it does go off, it's all right, because they're only going to lose a few hit points. Okay, the DCs are low. They're only going to lose a few hit points. It's really just a very slight speed bump in the game and nothing else. That's the modern concept of the trap. And I'm not going to comment on its, you know, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just going to say that part of the problem is with modern traps is traps are considered basically a way of taxing or reducing a player's character's hit points. So they are forced to resource manage their hit points, which is fine if that's what the players want to do and the Dungeon Master wants to do. Do they really want to manage the resources of hit points? Also, too, on top of that, if you keep doing this, because if it's just a tax that reduces just a small amount and you've got to keep sort of pumping up your hit points with spells and potions, or taking a short rest, as you can take a short rest nowadays, you can take a long rest and get your hit points back. But you can take 1 hour in Dungeons and Dragons 5e and you get all the hit points back. So resource management is not really a big factor. There are so many different ways you can get those hit points back. So they become, the modern trap is now more of an annoyance or a nuisance. And it's not scary, it's not exciting, it's just something to sort of wade through. And I know a lot of YouTubers have commented on this particular topic before, and I totally understand that, and I kind of view that exactly the same, is that it's a nuisance for me as the Dungeon Master, and I know that my players find it a nuisance as well. So there are more than a few people I have noticed on the internet that have started to talk about traps and how Dungeon Masters use traps, and suggesting that if a Dungeon Master uses traps, they're cheating. They're actually cheating at the game of Dungeons and Dragons, which I feel is absolute nonsense. And I don't know why it's coming into play so much, but I think it's a product of the view that the Dungeon Master and Dungeons and Dragons is a balanced game and everything is fairly paced out. So, you know, the players' characters have been equally balanced. The Dungeon Master's monsters have been equally balanced, which we know is impossible. It doesn't exist. We know that it's all about skill, right? It's a game of skill. But the problem is you're rolling 20-sided dice and other dice, and there's a random element. Now, you can play the numbers and the percentages, but you're not playing chess. And because of that, you know, the view that a Dungeon Master is cheating just doesn't make an awful lot of sense to me. I feel like that's the view that the Dungeon Master and the players are in a competitive game, and therefore we have to balance it and make sure that everybody's getting an even deal to ensure that nothing is considered cheating by the players or the Dungeon Master, and therefore let's remove the traps completely, because unless you do them a particular way, you're a Dungeon Master who's cheating. And I think that is just strange. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's a totally another video. It's another topic in terms of the concept of whether Dungeons and Dragons is actually a true game of strategy and tactics, which I believe it is not. Okay, so with traps such as this, there's no wonder that it's such a hot topic. You've got on the one side being told that, you know, if you don't do traps a particular way, you're cheating. If you do them another way, the old school way, you know, you're going to want a lot of players really hating you and maybe not even wanting to play at your table. If you do it the modern way, it's like attacks and resource management, but it's not really a particularly effective resource management tactic, because they can get their hit points back anyway pretty easily. So, I mean, why would you even, what do you do them? You want to just give up on them? Just leave them? Just forget them? It's like supposed to be a major part of Dungeons and Dragons. There are traps in dungeons. That's what you would think. And I think it's really hard for new dungeon masters and experienced dungeon masters to get past the fact that they've got to deal with all those things and how they're going to manage them. And it really bothers me that people kind of have made this such a big issue. So what are the choices for a dungeon master who needs to make a decision about this? And I'm going to give you some facts, and I'm also going to give you a simple definition about how traps are used in the real world. And we're going to apply the real world traps to your Dungeons and Dragons game, and I'm going to offer you a couple of different ways of looking at traps so that you understand that they're not quite the way everybody else has been explaining them to you, and they can be used very, very differently. First off, traps are designed so they can't be detected or understood. Now, let make it clear here, when I say they are designed so they won't be found, so they will be triggered and they will either capture the victim or the creature that activated that trap, or kill that creature or victim. That's their purpose. So to make it clear, remember, if they are designed not to be detected so that they will capture alive, they do not need to kill them, they don't have to do any damage, but they need to capture them and restrain them so that somebody can come back later on, okay, and collect them, collect the prize, collect the victim, collect the creature. Or they get captured and it kills them outright. Now, does it mean that the trap has to kill them instantly? No. It might take a little bit of time. And we're going to come to that topic very, very shortly. Understanding the trap. Just because you know there's a trap doesn't mean you'll understand how it works. And a good example of this is real world tombs and dungeons and crypts that are, you know, holding a lot of the treasures that our ancestors have hidden away. And they didn't want tomb robbers to come and pilfer those things. And literally there are dig sites where you are not allowed to go into them because the traps are so deadly and so dangerous that they have killed people. That's in real life. There are locations that they know there's stuff there, but they can't get in because the traps are so lethal. Does that make sense? So those are types of traps that are designed to kill whoever is trying to get into them. So that's one type of trap. And then there's the other type of trap, which I quite like and I think you should certainly consider using, and that is the one that captures alive its victim or creature. This is the cage trap for your bunny rabbit, so that you can come back later on and you decide, well, I'm going to breed some bunny rabbits so that I have lots and lots of bunny rabbits, and then I can have lots and lots of bunny rabbit stew. Or you come along and decide, I want to capture bunny rabbits because I have a new cosmetic that I want to test on the market. Or I want to capture a rare bird or animal, and then I'm going to shoot a little tag into it, or tag it, so that I can track it. I'm going to hook up some GPS so I know exactly where they are in the world, And you could do the same thing in your own game. Just so that you understand this, you literally could do this. You know, capture your victim, your player's characters, get them breeding, and then you can eat them later on. That's quite an interesting way of looking at it. Or, hey, maybe you have some tests to be done, some experimentation, and you need somebody to experiment on. And the player's characters just got captured by a trap, and of course the Lich comes back, or whoever it is, the mad scientist or archmage, and they're going to do some experimentation on there, whether that's magical or some other gross and perverted thing, who knows. But that's really completely up to you. Or maybe you want to capture them, inject them with some sort of magical element that allows you to track where they go, and when you're ready you can activate them, and then once you've activated it you can control their mind and their actions, and then use them as a pawn. Sounds really, really devious, doesn't it? Or maybe you just want to wait until they're in exactly the right position, and what they don't know is that there's an explosive, magical explosive that goes boom, and it explodes, and they take out the the enemy for you, and it's like a walking bomb. All of these make the game significantly more interesting, and that's from a trap that doesn't kill the player's characters. Okay, so now that we've talked about real-world traps, and this is how traps that don't kill their victims or creatures work. You know, these are the sorts of things that tend to happen. There is another type of trap, and that is the trap that I've been talking about. And I use the Dungeon Master's Guide to figure out how deadly the trap is going to be. Based off their level, there is a chart, and it shows you by level what the DC for a saving throw would be, what the attack roll will be for their level. I use that quite a lot when I'm constructing a trap. I will also use the damage output. Very easy, you can do that on the fly, piece of cake. And you pick the one that looks, I pick the one that's deadly. Now the deadly one for a level 1 character might potentially kill that character, but quite possibly it's going to put it down. And those classes who have very few hit points or are already injured and are continuing to explore without increasing their hit points back to maximum are at high risk of death. Whereas those classes who have lots of hit points and a hit dice which is quite high, they're more likely to simply just go down. That's how I approach my traps. Also too, remember, Wizards of the Coast has provided you with a whole lot of traps in their pre-published adventures that do very small amounts of damage. But what you can do is the damage that that trap does can continue round after round, or time after time, maybe every hour, maybe every 6 seconds. It's up to you. It's only doing a small amount of damage, but the longer that the players do nothing about that, the more damage it does, until eventually they wind up on 0 hit points, and potentially their character is dead. But it gives them an opportunity to do something. So you've actually turned the trap into a slow death trap, rather than you fail one check and then you're dead. But you still made it deadly. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Okay, there's one other thing I really want to impart to you. Actually, there's 2 other things I want to impart to you. I told you this was going to be a long video. And that is that when you are dealing with a trap that is designed for a smart creature, so beasts have got like an intelligence of 2. And most normal humanoids and humans have an intelligence of 10. They are significantly smarter, which means if you're dealing with somebody who's quite smart, you're going to design your traps so they are more advanced, they're going to have better triggers, they're going to be harder to find, and they are obviously going to be able to be set up in such a way to deal with a smarter victim. Otherwise there's no point. You don't put out a trap to capture somebody who's quite intelligent if you don't want it to work. You want the trap to work. So remember, you're dealing with a smart creature, the traps have to be more advanced, they have to be designed so they won't be detected otherwise, and they won't be figured out or disarmed. Okay, lastly, failure to make a saving throw with a trap. As I said, remember, it doesn't need to be death. Trap means capture, and there are two different types, and these are the things you need to focus on. I think that's, I'm not telling you you should use traps or you shouldn't use traps. I'm just telling you there are ways of dealing with both of these things and making them more interesting. And my traps are more like a skill challenge. I don't even want to say it's a skill challenge because they're not even that. They're more like it's like an action scene. You want your traps to be like Indiana Jones' first opening scene when he's dealing with the exploration of that cave. Raiders of the Lost Ark is a really good example, the very beginning of how traps should work, where you have a boulder that drops down and Indiana Jones knows it's going to cause him death if he doesn't get away. And so he's got time to try to get clear of it. Okay, those are all aspects of a really good trap. And by building in elements to it, you can turn your traps into essentially an action scene. I think traps make a really good action scene. And if you incorporate a trap that utilizes all the resources around that room or location, then instead of just one character dealing with the trap, you can now use it with all the characters being involved, which is far more interesting. It's not about everybody else just sitting and waiting to see what happens to the rogue or not. Is the rogue going to die today, or will they live? Okay, so that's essentially what I wanted to say about traps, and really, you know, hopefully this will be helpful for understanding how you can approach your own traps. What does this mean for the future? Well, once I sort myself out with the Dungeon Room series, which I'm trying to make work, which I'm having a lot of trouble with because it's not working out quite the way I'd hoped, I'm going to do some trap videos and I'm going to show you some examples, pretty much all the examples I can find in the Dungeon Master's Guide and Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And I'm going to pull out I'm going to do it the HowtoDandD way. I'm going to pull out maps, I'm going to pull out miniatures and monsters, and I'm going to make some little trap bits and pieces and show you how you can do them and turn them into an exciting action scene rather than a macro program, pre-programmed search and find system. Okay, that's my intention. So hopefully you found this video helpful or interesting, and if you did, then share and like the video. If you haven't watched my stuff before, you don't know about my channel, and you like this sort of thing, then please consider subscribing. Hitting the bell button will notify you when I go live. I go live quite a lot. It will also let you know when I publish a new video. If you want to support my channel, you did by sitting through this particular video right now, and I do appreciate those people who are up late watching this video right now. I don't do Patreon, but down in the description you'll find affiliate links where you can buy stuff online. I get a small commission, you pay exactly the same price, and honestly that does help me out quite a bit, and I do appreciate people who use that. You don't have to buy the thing I've linked to, you just have to go through the link and you can buy anything else you like. It's Book Depository and Amazon, I believe. Alright, and look, if you have any questions, start putting that in the chat box right now before I leave. If you're not part of the live chat, then your comments, your feedback, your questions can all go down in the comments section. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. And it's alright, traps still work. Alright, okay, I need a drink of water. Oh, I'm taking the hat off. Oh, okay, alright. So, thank you, Aaron. Yes, I am back. And I'm trying really hard to do stuff or content that you guys will find useful. But I am having some technical difficulties right now. and last night was a good example of me trying to do private live streaming and people jumping into the room and getting all excited, and I just could not get it to work. But hopefully in the future it will. What's that, Aaron? Just got back from 5 weeks of medical leave. Oh, what's happened to you, Aaron? I hope you're all right. I'm glad to see you're back as well. You know, I'm back. I am, and I'm doing all right. You know, things are looking up. I got some of my stuff back. Not everything got stolen, which is nice. Yes, it was the last night when I was trying to do a private stream, which I thought nobody would be able to get into, but of course it doesn't seem to be the case. I don't know what the heck's with YouTube. People were saying that I was working on Dungeon Builder. A Dungeon Builder was hopefully going to be how I would present my Dungeon Room series, because I thought, well, I can build a dungeon on this computer program and live stream it and people can see it, and then I can talk about it as I go, and I thought it would be awesome. And it was just a pig. It was just awful. And I still want to use the program, but I can't seem to live stream it, probably because I don't have fiber, but also too, I think it's taxing my computer just too much to try and make it happen. I don't think the software is as elegant as I would like it to be, and live stream on YouTube at the same time. I must have to upgrade my computer, which that ain't going to happen anytime soon. Well, what's this? My wife, she's fine, but has to take care of kids. Okay, all right. Well, that's so it was your okay. So you were looking after the kids while your wife was recuperating. Now I understand. Makes perfect sense. All right. Well, look, I think that's it. I think we're done. I've been blabbing for almost half an hour, and I do apologise. This is a really long live stream on a night where I normally work. So, and I said I wouldn't do that, but I have. What can you expect tomorrow? Well, hopefully tomorrow I will go and buy a new car. I'm crossing my fingers, but I'm going to try and present something for the players. Basically how to connect their characters, you know, how the players can connect their characters to each other, and those relationships and connections, how they can make that happen. I know that's really useful for Dungeon Masters as well, because it's always difficult if everybody meets in a tavern and they're all strangers and they've met for the very first time, because that's the last thing you want. So you want to build into their backstories some strong connections so they have a reason to be adventuring together. Otherwise you wind up with, the last thing you want is a lone wolf with a bunch of people who are team players, and it doesn't work. Or you wind up with a whole lot of people who have differing reasons for going somewhere, but they don't really mesh together very well because they don't have any desire to be with each other for any reason whatsoever. So I thought that would be a really good topic that one would help the players, and you as Dungeon Masters could then push that information towards your players to make your lives a little bit easier. And I have a good page worth, I think it's like 30 different links and relationships you can build in. So I'm hoping that'll be a good live stream for tomorrow. Yes. We've got to get them together and link them up before they start adventuring, because if you don't do that, it makes it really, really difficult. But hey, look, I think it's time for me to head off, and we will get back to talking about Dungeons and Dragons and all the fun things that we can do with it tomorrow. But it'll be about character relationships. So I'm going to say good night.